Welcome to this explainer. We're diving straight into a fascinating, century-long evolution of anti-imperialist solidarity. We'll be tracking how this idea morphed from early, formal political coalitions in the 1920s all the way to the modern, decentralized, stateless armed groups we see today. It's a massive shift in geopolitical history, and I am super excited to walk you through it. So, the big question we need to unpack is this. How exactly does a single 1927 meeting in Brussels spark 100 years of global, cross-border armed resistance? Well, to figure that out, we have to look closely at the history of an idea and how transnational liberation movements continuously adapted to a rapidly changing global order. Here is our roadmap for today. We're covering the 1927 Foundation, Cold War State Agency, Cuba's Revolutionary Global Aid, and finally, modern manifestations. Let's get right into it.
To anchor this whole narrative, we've got 4 pivotal dates on the board. Together, these markers are absolutely crucial because they illustrate the evolution from diplomatic congresses to state-sponsored non-alignment and eventually to direct military interventions. Starting off with Section 1, the 1927 Foundation and the Brussels Congress. This gathering was, quite literally, a game changer. It forged unprecedented links between liberation movements across entirely different continents. You had prominent, globally recognized figures rubbing shoulders. People like Lamine Senghor from Senegal, Jawaharlal Nehru from India, and Carlos Quijano from Uruguay. And speaking on behalf of the Latin American delegations, Carlos Quijano delivered this incredibly fiery speech. He firmly declared international solidarity against global imperialist forces, stating that the enemy of all other oppressed peoples is our enemy as well. By doing this, he directly tied the struggles of Latin America to those happening in China, India, and Egypt, creating a unified global narrative. Now, the root of Quijano's frustration, that lays squarely in the Monroe Doctrine. He argued that this policy essentially gave American capital a free pass to ruthlessly exploit regional workers and extract raw materials, all while maintaining an absolute sphere of influence. In his address, Quijano pointed to very specific instances of U.S. intervention, highlighting military and political maneuvers in Nicaragua and Venezuela. And he noted that because of these actions, everyday workers, peasants, and students were already waking up to the absolute necessity of forming a united cross-border front. Moving on to Section 2, Cold War State Agency on Third Worldism. As we move into the Cold War era, you start to see a really sharp contrast in tactics among newly independent nations. On one hand, you have Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah heavily favoring non-violent continental unity and diplomacy. But on the flip side, there's Algeria's Ahmed Ben Bella, who is convinced that colonialism only understood one language, and that was force. Take Nkrumah, for instance. He was incredibly pragmatic. He fiercely advocated for Pan-Africanism, believing total liberation was essential. But he also had to balance that anti-colonial stance with strict economic realities. For example, he ended up accepting American financing for Ghana's massive Volta River project. He really knew how to navigate the geopolitical board for his country's survival. Meanwhile, Ben Bella took a totally different, highly militant approach. He positioned Algeria as this major hub for Arab and African solidarity, publicly funneling funds, arms, and training to movements like the ANC in South Africa. But here's the clever part. He strategically maintained diplomatic neutrality, which ensured Algeria didn't just become another proxy for the US or the Soviets. That brings us to Section 3, Cuba's Revolutionary Global Aid and its dual thrust. If you compare these leaders, a distinct tactical evolution really jumps out. Just look at Fidel Castro's approach at the bottom here. He utilized what you could call a dual thrust of both military and humanitarian aid. And Castro was willing to deploy this direct, hands-on support, even while facing intense geopolitical pressure and severe economic embargoes from the West. For Castro, this was an independent ideological commitment. He wasn't just shipping off weapons, he was sending volunteer aid workers, construction crews, doctors, and actual military forces to places like Angola and Namibia. It was a full-scale, comprehensive approach to nation-building for these newly liberated territories. To protect these newly independent nations, Castro employed a fascinating military doctrine known as offensive defense. Instead of just sitting back and waiting to be attacked, this meant taking proactive, preemptive actions.
He used this specifically to help African nations consolidate their power from within, actively resisting and repelling South African apartheid forces. And finally, Section 4, Modern Manifestations and the International Freedom Battalion. Fast forward to 2014. Foreign fighters with socialist and anarchist convictions traveled to Syria to form the International Freedom Battalion, or IFB, aiming to defend the social revolution in Rojava. This was essentially an umbrella group that unified several left-wing factions, including the United Freedom Forces and the International Revolutionary People's Guerrilla Forces. Now, the crucial takeaway here is that the IFB was directly inspired by the international brigades of the Spanish Civil War. These modern, decentralized groups are actually carrying forward the exact same cross-border solidarity that Carlos Quijano was talking about in Brussels way back in 1927. It really goes to show that this flavor of internationalism has simply adapted to a modern world where non-state actors can easily coordinate across borders. So, as we wrap up this explainer and look back at this massive, century-long shift, we really have to ask ourselves, does the evolution from those formal political congresses in 1927 Brussels to today's stateless militias suggest that internationalism is now a permanent, borderless force? And how will the enduring legacy of these historical movements continue to shape the decentralized global struggles of tomorrow? It is absolutely something to think about. Thanks for exploring this with me today.